It's so hard to get a good handle of what's happening with AI, not least because AI is a broad term that encompasses lots of different things in where we interface with it, but also because it's a fast moving space on a lot of different fronts. So it's fast moving in the physical impact that it's having as we race to suck up all the chips and use more processing power and build more data centers, et cetera, et cetera. It's fast moving in the capital that it's sucking up with record breaking public listings and record making investment, record making losses, et cetera, et cetera. And it's also fast moving in the discourse where we come across certain ideas that are shocking in one moment or would have been shocking just 5 years ago. And then they become completely normal. And not just ideas, but also the tools themselves. If just one person had access to all the stuff that we all do at sort of the Google Gemini Lite stage now, it could put you at a significant advantage in the past, but because we've all got them, it kind of filters through and we get used to it. And I think, even just speaking for myself, I've already gotten used to the rate of advancement in that a few years ago, you could generate a video that looked horrible, but now you can generate something that looks like it was made in a production studio. And similarly, the writing a few years ago was alienating and visibly full of mistakes, whereas now there are more and more domains in which I would be better off getting an AI agent to do a particular task for me than to do it myself, time-wise, energy-wise, and quality-wise. I know it's easy to be cynical when we see the obvious mistakes that come with AI when we search for something like who is winning a game in the World Cup and it'll just make something up. But at the same time, last week I had to submit a letter in Hungarian as a kindergarten application, and it was able to generate that in 10 seconds, and it would have taken me probably an hour to do the same equivalent work for myself. And when you add out those gains across the work that everybody's doing across the planet, okay, it's big now, but if this rate of change continues even at the pace that it's already been going, then all the predicted and obvious huge swathes of human activity that we do become obsolete or at least completely inefficient to get humans to do them. And then what are the social consequences of that? Well, we don't know. And obviously, a lot of people are talking about this, and a lot of people who are expert in these realms, which I'm not at all, are duking it out and finding what the appropriate levels could or should be for how we integrate these technologies in our societies and how we respond as a collective as a result. So I am a little bit wary of wading into the space, but I do think I have something genuine to offer because I was reflecting upon it and thinking this is a discourse that we can't leave to the invested parties to have out in front of us because they are consequences that we all bear, and they do tend to be the same types of people having these conversations anyway. So I think by the virtue of being a moron, once again, I'm happy to offer a perspective thinking it might be useful to explore. And furthermore, I think the framing of what we look at when we look at the impact of AI, because of all those quick dynamic movements, is inevitably leaving large swathes of things that will be very important to us that are perhaps under-considered relative to the more sexy problems, like the image of robots taking over our entire society, or people never having to work again, or the sense of injustice that comes up when you hear about water usage or physical displacement or the creative commons being swept for resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see where we go. But to put at least some narrow boundary around what we're talking about today, I want to explore the idea that we're not ready for what's happening with the AI stuff to come. And in a way, for huge disruptions, you can kind of never be ready to some degree. And so many of the big things in our society are, of course, big ships that take a long time to turn in an environment in which we maybe have no time and need to be facing the other direction entirely. But given I generally believe that's the case across a large range of subtopics that occur under the idea of the impact of AI, I think that we owe it to each other to have active conversations and imagination around what the world might have to look like in the future so that we can work towards it earlier and have less impact in that disruption. And then at the outlier worst prospects, a collective agency to legitimize the type of action we may have to take to stave off the very worst of what might be to come. So stick around. There's a lot for us to chew into today. And as always, I don't like to take too much of your time. Before we get underway, thank you so much again to my Patreon patrons. After last week's episode of the Start Something New Club, there's a live chat in the Patreon. So if you're a member, head on over and pick something for yourself to do because, as you can see, if you're a white-collar worker, we're all getting wiped out into oblivion. I say we like I do anything. But the rest of us are getting wiped out into oblivion. So you're going to need to pick up some good hobbies, and why not get a head start on everybody else with some new skills. But also, thanks so much for backing the show generally. I'm delighted to have you on board. If you want to join yourself, head on over to patreon.com/Endry. All right, let's go. The largest study I could find on the sentiment of the impact of AI was a 2023 one, which is a survey of thousands of AI researchers. And that found that they collectively saw the chance of AI causing a human extinction level type event as being 5% on average, or 15% as a mean, because there were some outliers that were very confident that we would all be extinct soon. And, if you're not statistically minded, 5% maybe doesn't sound like very much, but there are a lot of activities that you would never dream of doing that have a significantly lower risk of killing just you or causing serious injury just to you. So to be proceeding kind of balls to the wall with an undertaking that the very experts within these fields consider to be a 5% chance of not just significantly hurting you or killing you, but extinguishing all human life on the planet, that's that's pretty significant and alarming. And we have so many images of this through science fiction and fiction. And increasingly, we have, I guess, a closing gap between how we can imagine that this would happen in the abstract, say, like in the Matrix or something like that, and a reality where we can see, autonomous drones are killing, we've got nuclear weapons, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all becoming a little bit too plausible. And so that captures the imagination and is absolutely worth representing at all levels, why it might be important to do the best to ameliorate the risks of that wherever possible. And this has led to things like open letters being signed by many leading figures in AI companies and researchers calling for moratoria on the development of the technology or better regulations to ensure that doesn't happen. And of course, the problem is with these things, you only really need one actor to keep moving forward for things to progress. And if our species has demonstrated anything, it's that if there's a box in the corner that says don't open it, something bad could happen. And there's a chance that you'll become really powerful and rich if you open it. 100 times out of 100, somebody is going to be around to open that box. And so we keep moving forward. But the premise of this episode today, at least in part, is to invite you, and to do so myself also, to explore these topics from outside the arena, from within the arena of humanity, but outside the arena of someone who is day to day developing or profiting from the advancement of these AI technologies. Because the current scenario is, even if things go kind of as smoothly as they can, and perhaps even if you hit pause on everything where it is now, there's still a huge displacement to ripple out. And if it seems that our systems are not equipped to stunt the forward momentum that this technology and the people working on it have, then I think the same can be said for our existing systems and technologies and cultures to deal with perhaps some of the more normal and predictable impacts that are to come. And this being the case, I just want to reiterate how important I think it is for people to be skin in this game that are not the types of people that are the amalgam of computer engineers, tech startup types, and just general frontier power pursuers that characterize most of the discourse and idea space and thought leadership that we get on this stuff. And that would be true even if those people were magnanimous, benevolent, wise agents who are all acting in harmony to pursue the best possible outcomes for humanity. And obviously, there's plenty of evidence that that's not the case when you're looking at the major CEOs of the AI tech companies at the moment. But as I said, even if it were, you don't want the same type of people to have their hands on the reins of cultural discussions, particularly when they're uniformly impactful. Because, these are lessons of why we have a liberal society. The capacity to find the best ideas from unexpected quarters and the value of seeing the dignity in all of us, regardless of our style of doing things, to the limit of that impacting other people negatively, is a virtue that I think is worth defending in any arena, but particularly ones that are, I guess, in this instance, a kind of giant re-sweeping and restructuring of how everyone will go about everything. And so that already raises issues like concerns around tech monopolies, concerns around those corners of the planet, which are the majority of the people who are kind of entirely without any political or financial leverage over these tech giants, even as they are, let alone as powerful as they are coming to be. And so we need more perspectives. And one fantastic example of this from at least to me, an unexpected corner, was Pope Leo XIV, who in May of this year issued Magnifica Humanitas, which, if you haven't read it, is well worth printing out and reading and keeping in your house, just for a number of reasons. Firstly, because it's impressive for somebody outside the arena to use such a high station to offer reflections upon such important topics. But also because the reflections themselves are high level and interesting and very different from the ones that you find within the tech arena, which I think serves the case I'm making generally for strong voices outside of those usual arenas to get him to wade into this conversation. And what the Pope writes in this encyclical is essentially an entreaty to disarm AI and pleading for technology to serve humanity rather than to concentrate power, which is kind of already like a sci-fi novel. But if you look at the concentration of power that has occurred around the tech oligarchs in the last couple decades, it itself is already in the realms of dystopian sci-fi. And as I've explored in a previous episode entitled, I think, The Coming Trillionaires, it really does look as though that concentration that we see now is maybe nothing compared to what's going to happen in the next decade or so, if not less. And so knowing that many of you won't take the time to read it, the Pope's concerned primarily that AI development is being done under the motivation and towards the end of concentrating power and increasing power, regardless of the real world consequences that are going to be generated from that, like job displacement, digital slavery, manipulation of truth through disinformation. He also looks at something I looked at in an episode a few weeks ago, which is the use of AI in autonomous weapons systems. And it's just generally calling for moral frameworks to contain these developments with sort of species-wise oversight. So just to take a paragraph from the introduction, we're living through a rapid phase of transition, a change of era, in which, while some are vying for the future of new technologies and others dedicate themselves to reflecting on the matter, most people are watching and waiting, observing from afar and merely hoping for the best. For this very reason, crucial questions impose themselves on our conscience and can no longer be avoided. Where are we going? Toward what goal do we wish to orient ourselves? What direction should we choose as a people and as a human community? I think that that's probably a pretty prescient and evergreen sentiment, and probably also a pretty inevitable outcome. I don't think you're going to have 100% of people having buy-in on where we collectively go on abstract issues. But it is worth saying that this encyclical was presented alongside Chris Olah, who's a co-founder of Anthropic. And he explicitly said in the co-presentation of this his appreciation for the Vatican for taking leadership in this and seeing from the outside what we cannot from within. So, of course, there are concerns about the moral direction of this stuff from those within. But given what's likely to happen is going to be such a significant sweeping across all of us and everything, our collective response does benefit from having everybody who is affected from having a hand in determining where these things go and how to shape our response to them. And even though I love to talk about military technologies and drones and autonomous killing and management of the world's nuclear stocks and those sorts of things, today I'm going to duck to lower levels than that, because beyond representing that we would all like to continue living, I'm not really sure what there is that we can generally do about the risk of autonomous systems overtaking nuclear stocks and things like that. I think it's all pretty well known what the risks and consequences are of getting that stuff wrong. So I guess instead I want to invite you to reflect upon, if all of this stuff goes kind of on the linear path as we can imagine and things go well, what's that going to mean for our lives, societies, plans for the future, and how our species generally goes about things? Because kind of even the least impactful scenarios are still unprecedented in their flavor of what the type of impact could be. And for instance, any value that you think you produce sitting at a computer, it's quite possible that all of that will be entirely overtaken by agents that will be able to do it for a fraction of the time and energy and at a higher quality output within a year or years, if that hasn't happened already. And at least on this frontier, I'm pretty optimistic about how things could go, because while a lot of the conversation publicly is around protecting people's jobs and making sure people have livelihoods and whatever else, I get that that's important, but I don't think that arbitrarily protecting those is an optimal way of going about things. I mean, we don't need to take our pickaxe to the mountain and dig all day to get the rocks that we used to make metals. We could do all that stuff with machines now, and a tiny fraction of the humans doing it. And I wouldn't think it beneficial for us to suddenly, as a simulacrum, go back to holding pickaxes and just crushing rocks for the sake of the joy of it. I think there are other things that we can do with our time. And similarly, for those of us who work on computers, and for those of us in the coming few years to follow as robotics come and overtake the physical realm, use our bodies to achieve skilled tasks in the physical world. While there are large elements of that that are worth protecting, I think we can disaggregate them from the utility of overall having that to be everybody's jobs, just for the sake of preserving some kind of stability. And maybe that sounds really obvious to you, but that is not the position of a lot of major organizations. And I think this goes to something I'll talk about a bit later, which is how poorly prepared we are institutionally and culturally for this shift. But there's a non-zero chance, and perhaps even a reasonable chance, that all of us will be liberated from the things that we do to generate value for each other in society pretty soon. And instead, we'll have to find other ways to create value and share meaning and pass the time in this old life that we have. And so it's not just a question for the economists or for the free marketeers or for the environmentalists or for the unions or even for the Pope, but it's a question for you. If everything that you've done in your life for work to date is able to be replaced at a snap, at scale, what are the elements that you miss? What are the elements that you wish you could keep doing? I was recently speaking with a friend who's in a very, very advanced field. This friend must be quite literally one in tens of millions for their capacities, and they're about to be replaced entirely. And they were reflecting that, oh, well, they'll just find some replica approximation of the types of things that they do and enjoy that. And my first thought was, well, it's not that simple, because part of what they enjoy doing is that their work is on a frontier that's advancing the species, and you can't just reclaim that by doing some puzzles instead. I suppose now that I say it, this is probably already what's happened to a degree. We've already outsourced a lot of our need to be physically productive and our instincts for competition and all those sorts of things to the simulacra of video games and social media and watching others play sport, et cetera, et cetera. But as satisfying as those things are, and I love all of those things, they're still not one-to-one like replacements. And they probably do collectively, if we were all to stop doing the things that bring us meaning and all to replace them with something that was a simulated approximation, there would be byproducts from that, which I wouldn't dare to predict what they would be, but I anticipate there'd be some expressions of dissatisfaction, which I think you already see with the levels of depression and anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. And if we're to experience changes that sort of sweep in and things dynamically happen through the roof, you can expect other things to pressure valve through the roof as well. I don't know what that would be. But I invite you to think about it for yourself, because, what is your job? You might think that it's producing X number of sprockets for Mr. Spacely and then going home, but it's not really. Like, it's going in and socializing with people doing the same mission. It's possibly being surrounded by people that have similar values to you towards some end goal that you all share. It's possibly also having a site to complain about other types of people, or to have disagreements and to have them in contained and bounded ways. I think there's a lot of instances in the coming years where we're going to see how what we call things is very different from what they are, in that a computer can pick up and do a bunch of tasks supplanting the job, but actually it's the case that whatever the job might be encompasses all these other things and has a social function that's larger than we've been able to articulate in language or code, or even conceptualization. And so then, if you were liberated from everything you had to do and were able to get a same level, or perhaps significantly higher level of material comfort in your life, what would you replace that with? Like, maybe it's obvious. Maybe you hate your job and you're like, oh, thank goodness I can just go play bridge all day and hang out with my grandkids. But I suspect for most of us, it's a difficult question. And a big part of our identity is bound up not only with the work, but it's striving for improvement across that, striving for recognition, the status that comes from that, and a sense of connection to the overall mission of what our work is. Because it's quite possible that all those things will be obliterated and will have to be accessed in different ways. Because even here in 2026, it kind of feels like an abstract pie in the sky thing to talk about, but it's already a material reality for many people to be struggling with that displacement and to be in a world where there is more material wealth, but less accessible meaning and status. And if that balloons to encompass basically everybody and then ultimately everybody, then a whole bunch of our social structures just won't make sense anymore. And we're going to need to construct new ones. And we may as well have good consideration of what that is early on. Because I think it's pretty clear that even the present level of so-called disruption that we're experiencing has exposed our social systems as being inadequate, to the point where many of our traditional cultures and institutions are strained to or beyond breaking point. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was looking at Pauline Hanson, and regardless of what you think about any of the various far right movements around the world, I think it's pretty clear that democracy, as most of us in the West have experienced it for the last 80 years, is buckling pretty heavily under even just one or two technologies like Facebook and the end of print media. Similarly, just as our jobs and careers have a different shape to what they did for much of the previous century, institutions like unions don't really seem to make that much sense. I mean, to be arguing for the dignity of everybody retaining their job as it is in a world in which that job generates nothing, or that industry is completely irrelevant, begs the question, what would a better model of a union look like today? And the political parties that are based off of union power, what's their relevance, and what would better versions of them look like? And then even much older cultural institutions are also under great strain or totally reshaped because of various technological disruptions in the past decades. Courtship, relationships, sex, procreation, all of these things are significantly and measurably different in that fewer people are forming relationships, people having far less sex, even those who are in relationships, and many more people having no sex at all compared to in the past. And the seemingly universal trend toward fewer and fewer children is just on its own something that feeds into a system like taxation or economic growth. To invalidate them to a degree. I mean, we've kind of comfortably and blindly built our economic system on the idea that there can be continued growth, and perhaps there can, but without fundamental inputs like as many or more people, those systems crumble pretty quickly. And that one tiny thread, which is, whilst a massive point of discussion and point of impact on our planet today, that's just one of a panoply of threads that you'll be able to pull at, and to see that the ways in which we've gone about things and assumed that things would continue is no longer viable and will have to have a whole new shape. I, for myself, just to offer up what I'm imploring everyone else to do, think that there's a great opportunity to reconnect with the core of what our best human instincts for expression of life might be. But that will involve fighting against the inertia of infinite comfort and resourcing and access to limitless depths of things that members of our species of previous generations couldn't touch even a tiny percentage of compared to what we'll have. And I think you're seeing that already. And this is not because I don't value doing nothing or indulging yourself or just exploring your hobbies. I value these things more than most people as a revealed preference. Just more that it's unlikely that these are going to be sufficient sources of meaning for people to be happy, for people to be feeling like they're living best expressed lives. And so in an environment where we may be losing our access to conventional systems of how our behaviors connect to ideas of hierarchy and status and socialization and meaning and generating value and building skills, et cetera, we're going to need to find more autonomous ways and hopefully systems to help each other to get those things together. Because if we are at the cusp of birthing essentially a god that's capable of doing everything that you have ever done, but better, and I don't think that that's an unrealistic proposition in perhaps most realms of human endeavor, then it's going to be a really beneficial skill to have cultivated in advance, to have a fitness for reckoning with what that meaning is for you, and some sort of physical and intellectual fitness for what it is to generate movement towards that autonomously. And so in the meantime, you can see the kind of predictable consolidation of power for certain parts of the world and political organizations and financial incumbents, et cetera, and certain extreme personality types to continue kind of as it has anyway. Like that's interesting in its scale, as I discussed in that previous episode of the trillionaires, but it's not interesting in its force motivation. There's nothing new about that. It's not that it's not interesting to watch. It's just, it doesn't interest me because there's probably nothing I can do about it. And it's the type of thing that would exist anyway. I think particularly, we get so caught up with billionaires under capitalism and these sorts of things. But I mean, you see this exact same phenomenon under systems in which you're not allowed to have private property. You still see the same people concentrating extraordinary power and using it to advance themselves, etc. Not that I've studied this, but I'm sure you see it if you look at the 200 people that live in hippie communes. I'm sure you still see the same inevitable arising of somebody who's manipulating the resources of that system to concentrate them all towards their own personal benefit at the expense of the group. And so that part of how this AI stuff plays out, I think we already see and can understand a bit. But most of us, and I assume everybody who listens to my podcast, which is, I mean, if you let's face it, poorly visually produced, not smoothly marketed. It's not geared to offer tips to the psychos to get ahead. So I doubt there are many in the audience. It's just not for them. But for the rest of us, there are still great questions in how we respond to what is playing out and going to play out. And just invite you to take the time to think about it and to realize that if you were assuming that the things that you were invested in would play out as they would have played out between 20 years ago and now, you probably need to rethink that and to come up with some sort of strategy or conceptualization of what your life in the world will be. And so, sorry to toot my own horn, as they say, but one nice thing that I can offer in this is the benefit of being able to do new things for yourself autonomously, to cultivate that skill and to cultivate that fitness, the idea that you can start new things and can find meaning in different corners that you haven't encountered so far. So I want to give another plug for the Start Something New as an Adult Club. It's something you're invited to do if you listen to the previous episode. You don't need to be a patron to do it, but if you are, then you can do it in company, where we're having conversation about what we might want to do, the goals that we want to set, and then finding ways to keep each other accountable. And that's over at patreon.com/Andrew. Or if you just want to generally support the show, jump on there. But for now, I'll leave you with a minute of silence before the theme song so you can take some space to reflect upon what your life will have to look like when all the things that you're doing generate no value and you have sufficient resources provided as a baseline. What might you need to do to be best prepared for that? Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful week.